All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Community Development Block Grant Application Writing Workshop. We're excited to get underway and hear your questions about the program and deliver some information on the program so that you can prepare an application, hopefully for our upcoming Housing and Public Facilities round. This morning, if you could just take a moment to write your name in the chat, we'd appreciate it, so we could get an understanding of who's joining us today. So if you could just drop your name and affiliation there, that would be wonderful. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, if you could use the Q&A feature, the Q&A box, to put questions in, we will be monitoring that throughout and taking questions as appropriate throughout the presentation. So if you could place them in that Q&A box, that'd be great. So today we are going to, as I mentioned, cover an overview of the Community Development Block Grant Program. Before that, we are just going to give you a brief introduction to CDFA in case you're unfamiliar with our organization and what we do across the state. When we get into the program, we're going to discuss some eligible activities, some threshold requirements, and an updated overview of our evaluation and scoring criteria. And as I mentioned, we will be answering questions throughout the program. So please, as they come to you, drop them in the Q&A box and we will monitor there. We are going to get started with that overview of CDFA by our Executive Director, Katie Easterly Marte. So at this point, I will pass it over to her and we'll get underway.
Great, thank you so much, Melissa. It's great to have everyone here today. There's so many familiar CDBG partners, and we really appreciate you taking the time to participate in this presentation and learn about the CDBG program, as well as the updates to the evaluation and scoring, both of which we'll discuss today. So I'm going to provide just an overview of CDFA. I think many of you know CDFA, but we'd love to bring your examples of projects that you've advanced in communities forward for your peers and really use that as a sounding board and a bouncing off place for projects across New Hampshire that maximize the value and impact of community development, economic development, and clean energy initiatives. CDFA provides financial and technical assistance resources to assist our partners in advancing these projects across New Hampshire. Those resources include grants like the Community Development Block Grants, which we'll speak about today, loans, those often fill the gaps or advance clean energy initiatives across New Hampshire for various project sponsors, and tax credit equity through the State Community Development Tax Credit Program. Again, we provide technical assistance across all of our programs. And this is what we call the ecosystem. So this is the way that we engage with our partners. And we really see a project often starting in concept initiation. Sometimes we're not part of that part of the project. Sometimes we're not part of the implementation, but we are part of the concept initiation. So we really look to provide resources across concept initiation when a project is just starting to bud, when it's rising up in a community or outlined in a master plan. We like to help to support the capacity that's necessary to move that project through to the planning and development stage, where we really see it necessary to advance things like site plans and architectural and engineering, energy audits. So we have resources that support those activities. As well as in the Community Development Block Grant Program, we have planning grants. I think most people are aware, but the planning grants last year moved to a rolling basis. So if anyone, as you listen to this presentation, identifies a project in a community, in your own community that you'd like to work on, or if you're a grant administrator in a community that you're partnering with, and you don't think it's quite ready for those implementation resources, but that project needs to be studied more, we would encourage you to come in on a rolling basis for those CDBG planning grants. They are up to $25,000, except in instances where they're transformative planning grants, and we will be announcing no later than July 1st the details about that. If you don't mind just going back one slide, Melissa, I'll move right along though. I got I think that makes sense, but we will have up to 3 transformative planning grants to study these really complex issues like broadband and childcare. So we'd like to work with you on that as well, and there will be further information coming. And then the place that we really provide the majority of our resources is in this implementation stage of projects. Of the $16 million that we administer and award each year, the majority is in implementation in our tax credit program, the block grant program, the Clean Energy Fund, and the Community Development Fund. Next slide. So CDFA in 2020 invested nearly $18 million in communities across New Hampshire, and you can see from this map that it does span many communities in our state. And we always are looking to really engage with those communities that have not yet applied for funds or haven't applied for funds recently. But last year we supported nearly 109 different projects, and these represent those projects. And as part of the tax credit program, it's really a private-public partnership. And so businesses are the donors to those projects. And there were over 200 businesses that supported projects across the state. Next slide. And a couple of focus areas, and just again to highlight some projects that have been done in communities. This is a project in West Lebanon, New Hampshire, and it was a net zero building, which means it has very little environmental impact and has some really significant design features that allow it to be quite sustainable. It was built right next to the newly renovated library and provides families the opportunity to access this affordable housing in West Lebanon, which is a very walkable community. And we were able to support this project with the block grant funds. We invest through the community development block grants in infrastructure. So these pictures are from Littleton. And if you've been to Littleton, you'll know that they have a very vibrant main street with many small businesses, housing, municipal activities. And the community visioned an expansion of that activity onto their riverfront. And one of the real needs in order to facilitate that expansion and also meet the needs of the existing residents, the majority of which were low and moderate income, was to replace the water and sewer infrastructure and be sure that it was efficient and working well. So this water and sewer project was supported by many resources, including the CDBG Public Facilities grant. And the middle picture is when that water and sewer was put in. And then there's been a huge amount of growth in new businesses in the town of Littleton in that riverfront district due to this and many other investments. We look to provide resources to advance your project and understand that often one resource isn't enough to advance your project, particularly as you really are dealing with complex issues and looking to achieve really significant results. So in this project in Maple Manor in Newport, we were able to help the project sponsor to facilitate an energy audit and to understand that they could do significant energy efficiency upgrades to their building, as well as to install solar. And so we were able to provide a clean energy loan in addition to the block grant that supported renovations here. And this creates a much more suitable living environment in which the buildings are better controlled for temperature, they're healthier, and it will also reduce operating costs in the long run. And so we do have additional resources to the block grants, and we'd love to talk to you about how some of those resources would help support your project. So many of you have been involved with us, and we really appreciate the engagement because we're always looking to ensure that the CDBG program responds to new challenges across our state. So in 2021, this year so our program year starts July 1st. And in addition to our rolling opportunities for funding, the first major funding opportunity is the public facilities and housing, which we hope you will consider applying for at the end of July, and is the focus of today's workshop. And in this new program year, we've really looked to advance new priorities through the consolidated plan, which sets a vision for the investment of these resources for the next 5 years, and then what's called the action plan, which specifically speaks to what we'll do in this first year. So a couple of things that came from our engagement with our partners and that we worked on with our Community Development Advisory Committee, and if there's any advisory committee members on today's webinar, I want to thank you for your help in really identifying ways that we can improve the program. But we've increased the funds and capacity for communities to develop and implement high priority activities. One of the ways that we've done so, as I talked about a little bit earlier, was to increase to really have some higher dollar amount planning studies that support really complex planning studies. And that was one, and then we also provided additional resources for the development of affordable housing. We are looking to actually build some of the needs that are identified in those planning studies into transformative investments in economic development, where we're actually prioritizing projects that build on one another, so that you could do a public facilities project and then maybe the next year be prioritized for funding for an economic development project. And then we're always looking to improve our technical assistance and our guidance to you to implement these complex projects, which are using federal resources, so really reducing that regulatory burden, being sure that you understand those requirements, that we help you through them along the way. So that's the advancement of our new application and program guide, which we hope you have in front of you today, in which we really simplified a number of expectations and requirements, removed some of those requirements that could be removed, and looking to provide as clear guidance as possible throughout the administration of the program. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So I think we're getting, at this point, I'm going to be turning the presentation over to our Director of Community Housing and Community Development, Molly Kaler. And Molly will review the community development program in detail, ensuring that you have a good sense of how the program works and hopefully how you can prepare an application. So with that, I'll welcome Molly to be presenting this next piece. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Katie. Good morning, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today. I'm going to get into the nuts and bolts of the CDBG program now. Again, if you guys have any questions while I'm going through this material, please feel free to type in your questions in the chat box. So CDFA deploys approximately $9.4 million of Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Development to eligible municipalities to support the development of viable, sustainable, and equitable communities by expanding economic opportunities for persons of low and moderate income. CDFA has administered the annual allocation of federal CDBG funds on behalf of the state since 2003, coordinating the investment of more than $150 million into New Hampshire communities. These critical resources have been deployed across the state and have made a significant impact on economic development, housing, and community-based projects in dozens of municipalities. Before we jump into the program overview, I want to review the resources CDFA has developed to assist our partners in more easily accessing program-related information and materials. As many of you know, CDFA recently launched a newly designed website, which provides more streamlined, high-level information on the organization, our programs, and how nonprofits, municipalities, and businesses can engage with CDFA. As part of that effort, we developed a new resource hub to provide improved access to program-related information and resources for our partners. You can quickly and easily access the resource hub via the orange button on the top right corner of CDFA's website, or by visiting resources.nhcdfa.org. Many of you are likely used to accessing our very detailed program-related information and forms and documents through our main website. But now all that information is located on our resource hub. So the information that we review today and much more can be found on the hub and within our program and application guide and our implementation guide, which are posted there. Links to each of those materials were sent via email to all the attendees yesterday afternoon. And again, they're also available right on the website. The Resource Hub, again, is an online platform that guides partners through the different phases of the application, pre-application, application, and implementation. Partners using the Resource Hub can expect to find guidance on CDFA program objectives and eligibility, the application process, and how to successfully implement a project leveraging these resources. So each page or form on the Resource Hub is printer friendly, and pages can be made into a PDF or emailed easily by clicking the appropriate icon at the bottom of the page. Once you select a program from the drop-down menu, you can use the sidebar to navigate content within the pre-application, application, and implementation sections. Under the pre-application section, you'll find an overview of the program and its objectives, key dates, and deadlines relative to the grant opportunity, and also information on pre-application requirements. The application section provides more in-depth information on the program. This includes eligibility, program guidelines, steps for applying, and how your application will be evaluated. There is also a link to download the full CDBG application and program guide. Again, that was just recently updated, and we sent that to you yesterday afternoon, but you will find the link to that on this section of the website as well. Then the implementation section breaks down how to administer a CDBG grant, including general grantee requirements and administration, how to access funds, reporting requirements, and then how to close out your grant. So all the important information once you are awarded funds. Each subsection includes links to all the relevant forms and webinars and additional resources. And again, you can print documents right from the hub. We're excited about these tools, and we think they will help us deliver enhanced technical assistance and support across our programs. And we hope that you find this website easy to navigate, and welcome any feedback you might have or questions that you might have if you're looking for information on that. So CDBG was established to address unique community development needs. It was established under the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, and formula grants are provided to entitlement communities and to states on an annual basis. The primary statutory objectives of CDBG are to, 1, develop viable communities, 2, provide decent housing in a suitable living environment, and then to expand economic opportunities, principally for persons of low and moderate income. Eligible applicants. So awards are made to municipalities or county governments and are often subgranted to a subrecipient, which is typically a nonprofit. So who can apply? All New Hampshire counties and all New Hampshire cities and towns, with the exception of entitlement communities. This is in regard to our regular formula CDBG funds. It is for all of the communities except for Manchester, Nashua, Portsmouth, Rochester, and Dover. And again, those are referred to as entitlement communities. However, there is an exception to this that we'll be talking about today, which is a special allocation of funding we received called CDBG-CV funding. And for that funding opportunity, the projects located in entitlements are likely eligible to apply. So we will talk more about that as we move through these slides. CDBG is broken up into 2 program areas. Again, the entitlement program and the state program, as I just mentioned. Entitlement communities receive their funding directly from HUD. The state-administered CDBG program includes those units of general local government who do not receive those funds, the CDBG funds, directly from HUD. Nationwide, on average, entitlement communities receive 70% of all of the CDBG funding, and then 30% of the remaining funding goes to the state-run small cities programs. So here in New Hampshire, there are a number of small entitlement communities, the 5 I just noted, and they get about 1/4 of the funding. The rest of the CDBG funding comes to CDFA, which runs New Hampshire's versions of the Small Cities program. CDFA's 2021 Action Plan allocates CDBG funds across 3 major categories, as you can see in the pie chart here: economic development, housing, and public facilities. This is in addition to funding that goes towards planning grants, emergency grants, and then there is, of course, funding that goes to administration and technical assistance as well. As I mentioned, sometimes in times of economic crisis and natural disasters, Congress may include budget line items for special HUD block grant allocations. This occurred in 2020 and 2021 in response to the current COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to CDBG terms and conditions, there are a number of requirements that apply to grantees and subrecipients that receive the CDBG-CV funding. So again, this special allocation that is specific to the coronavirus pandemic is referred to as CDBG-CV. Here in New Hampshire, we received about $14 million across 3 separate allocations of funding, and we have been working to disperse that to communities in various ways to prepare for and respond to coronavirus pandemic. And again, though that funding is very specific and has to go towards projects that are directly linked to COVID-19, and along with a lot of the regular requirements, there is the that requirement of that strong link to COVID. It has to, comply with all the regular Housing and Community Development Act requirements. And then there is also an additional documentation required to ensure that there is no duplication of benefits, which just essentially means that if a project is receiving funding from multiple sources, it has to ensure that the funding received does not exceed the need, the amount that's needed for a specific activity. So any projects that are funded with CDBG-CV do have that requirement, and we would work with those projects to ensure that all requirements are met. This slide just shows an overview of the flow of funding. So basically, the money comes at the federal level from HUD, and then it comes to us at CDFA, and then CDFA makes grants to municipalities or counties. Then some projects have subrecipients, which are often nonprofit organizations. And then lastly is the beneficiaries, which are low to moderate income individuals who are the ones that benefit from the projects. So today we are going to be focusing on the Housing and Public Facilities formula program that we typically run, as well as the CDBG-CV funds that are going to be available to housing and public facilities projects for this July round. But the CDBG program also has a number of other programs, which include economic development, planning, and emergency grants, as you can see here. There are annual funding limits per community, which we have on this slide. The limits don't count against each other. So you can be awarded up to $500,000 for housing, for example, and then you could also have, a community could also be awarded up to $500,000 for economic development. You can also have more than one award in each category, but the combined total can't exceed the annual limits. And then a county can also use its allowable allocation to sponsor a project within your community, but that project would have to be able to demonstrate that it has a regional impact. So it can't just be for that one municipality. The county could apply for a project that has a more regional scope. Applications for planning, economic development, and also for our emergency grant programs are accepted now on a rolling basis. So anywhere, anytime throughout the year, if a need arises, you can contact our office and talk with us about submitting an application for those programs. For the Housing and Public Facilities program, we currently run 2 application rounds per year. We typically have one with applications due in January, and this upcoming round that we have with applications due on Monday, July 26th at 4 p.m. We also have that additional funding at this time for the CDBG-CV, and what we are doing this year is we are making some of that funding available to housing and public facilities projects, and it's going to follow the same timeline and application deadline as our regular housing and public facilities program. All right, so now we're going to get into a little bit about writing and administering your grants. So when you're planning to apply for CDBG funds, it's really important to think through your project from the grant writing and application phase all the way through to the implementation and project completion. The grant administrator that you choose is going to play an important role from the beginning to end as they help guide your organization through the application process and successfully administer the CDBG funds in completing your project. So the first step, if you are, particularly if you're listening today and you're a nonprofit or what we refer to as a subrecipient, is to reach out to the community that you're located in, as again, eligible applicants are the municipalities and or the county if it's a regional project. So you need to have a conversation with your municipality about your project and see if they would be willing to be the applicant to CDBG for your project. And then you guys would need to determine together who would be the individual writing the grant. It may be an employee of the municipality. It may be a staff member of your local regional planning commission, or it could be one of a number of consultants who serve as grant writers who are very familiar with CDBG. We just recommend that your grant writer is somebody that is familiar with CDBG and how the CDBG program runs here in New Hampshire, as it there is a lot of information and a lot of steps involved in CDBG, and it's helpful to have somebody who is familiar with it. We, of course, are here to help anybody, particularly those of you who may be newer grant writers. We are certainly happy to help every step of the way with any questions that might come up as well. And then the last thing I'll say, which goes along with this next slide as well, is just that oftentimes the same person who is the grant writer ends up being the grant administrator, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the same person. Sometimes it can be a different person that is the person who writes the grant that in turn ends up being the grant administrator. So that's just something that you're going to want to think about early on in the process as well. This next slide shows just kind of an overview of the whole process of a CDBG grant. This includes, starts with a pre-application meeting or workshop like we're doing here today to give you an overview of the program. We strongly recommend that if you are considering coming in for an application, submitting an application, that you schedule one of our pre-application meetings, which I'll talk more about in a minute, to discuss the project. And it's really a good opportunity to have very project-specific questions and get some good feedback regarding next steps for the application process. After that meeting, the municipality would submit the application through our grant management system. All of the application narrative and all of the supporting documents are uploaded right through that system. Once it's received through the GMS system by the deadline, the CDFA staff then review and make recommendations and score applications which meet threshold criteria. After that point, the staff reviews are sent to the Community Development Advisory Committee for approval or denial. Our Community Development Advisory Committee is an advisory group whose members are appointed by statute or by the governor. And then after that, economic development applications and emergency grant, we just wanted to note here that economic development applications and emergency grants and planning grants are all again, reviewed on a rolling basis. And so that's, occurring throughout but they all take this process that we have outlined here as well. So after the Community Development Advisory Committee approves grants, the CDFA Board of Directors reviews them and then it also affirms those decisions. The board typically meets 3 business days after the CDAC, so it's a pretty quick process once the CDAC or advisory committee reviews, then it goes right to our board. And then if approved, contract language is prepared by staff and then contracts are sent to both the municipality and to the State Attorney General's office for review and signatures. And then the final step is that all contracts must be presented to the Governor and Executive Council for approval. CDFA staff are often called upon to explain the benefits of the project to the council before they vote. So the important thing to remember here is that the total process from CDFA approval to the Governor and Council confirmation takes approximately 4 months. CDFA does offer a bridge loan program to projects that may need funds expedited before the GNC approval, but these loans must be paid back even if GNC rejects the CDBG contract, which doesn't typically happen, but we do need to make sure that we note that. After approval, funds are ready for disbursement, and it's important to note that CDFA reimburses for work completed. It does not pre-fund projects. And then lastly, although the CDBG program year runs January to December, HUD often doesn't make its allocations available to the states until midway through the year. So depending upon the level of CDBG activity, the availability of funds CDFA can disperse might be delayed. And then just a bit more about the pre-application meeting. As I mentioned before, we strongly encourage all interested applicants to schedule a pre-application meeting. And for this upcoming round, we're encouraging you to start scheduling those as soon as possible. And they're a key element for a successful application because it will bring together all involved parties that are involved in the project. So that would include the municipality, the subrecipient, the grant writer, and our team here at CDFA. Right now, given the pandemic, we are coordinating these meetings via WebEx or other virtual platforms. So we're not meeting in person still, but we would set up a virtual meeting of all the involved parties to discuss the project and the CDBG program. We discuss the needs of the community and how that led to your specific project. We would go into details about the project, including timing and goals. And then importantly, we would also go over the required threshold requirements and documentations that you would need to submit with your application, and then the contractual obligations for all of the parties, including the municipality. So it's a really important meeting and tailored to each project specifically. So we strongly encourage you to set one of those meetings up soon if you are considering coming in for this upcoming July round. All right. And again, I just want to throw out there, if anybody has any questions regarding any of this material as we're going through, please don't forget that you can type those into the chat box and we'll try to answer those as we go. I'm next going to dive into the CDBG.
If we just want to pause real quick, we did just get a question.
Okay, perfect.
The question is, if a municipality is successfully awarded a project for the full amount for a public facility in the July round, would that municipality be able to apply for a public facility grant in January? Asking primarily since there was a leapfrog round back in July.
That's a good question because there was, as we shifted our program year to this new program year that we're going, which is, a July 1 to June 30th, we did have an extra round in 2020, but moving forward, it is that for the example or the question, if a municipality came in and for the full $500,000 in the July round, they would not be able to have another application come in the June round. That's the second round of the 2021 year. So they would not be eligible to come in that same category again until the new program year. Any other questions?
I don't see any additional questions at this time.
All right. All right, so now we're going to move into the CDBG program eligibility and talk a little bit about national objectives. So first, we're going to discuss the 3 national objectives that are allowed under federal regulations. These provide direct benefit to low and moderate income individuals or households, aid in the prevention or elimination of slums and blight, or eliminate serious and immediate threat to public health and safety. So again, there are 3 different objectives: the low and moderate income individuals, LMI, slum and blight, or urgent need. In New Hampshire, all projects, no matter what the national objective, must have a direct benefit to low to moderate income individuals of at least 51%. So again, all New Hampshire projects must have a direct benefit to LMI of at least 51%. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about the different categories here. So the national objective of providing direct benefit to 51% of low to moderate income persons or households can be met under 4 different categories. And you can see them listed here. It's area benefit, jobs, which is economic development, housing, and limited clientele. We're going to get into just a little deeper into each of these in these next couple slides. So in order for a grant application to be considered under the area benefit category, the following conditions apply. The benefit must be available to all residents of the project area. The project area must primarily be residential in character. At least 51% of the beneficiaries in the project area must be low to moderate income. The applicant must conduct an income survey or use census data if it coincides with the project area to establish the percentage of LMI beneficiaries. And the survey must be statistically valid, so you must also provide the survey methodology as well. And so we provide a lot more information about this, how to do these surveys and how to document this in Chapter 2 of our implementation guide, and that begins on Chapter 21. So if you are considering using this category at the area benefit category, you can go right to our implementation guide, and it will give you some more details regarding how you can demonstrate that. The next category is low and moderate income job creation. The activities must either create permanent jobs on a full-time equivalent basis, and at least 60% of those jobs must be held or made available to low and moderate income individuals. Or for job retention, at least 60% low and moderate income jobs must be retained and must meet other requirements set forth in the regulations. And again, for the job creation category, we have much more information outlined in Chapter 2 of the CDBG implementation guide, which can be found on the resource hub. The third category is housing. There is a number of different types of housing, which includes multifamily housing, single family, or new construction. For multifamily units assisted, affordable rents are required. A multifamily rehab requires 51% LMI benefits. And then if it's a duplex situation, at least one of the units must be for an LMI individual. Rental buildings under common ownership and located in the same or contiguous properties may be considered a single structure. And then for single family housing, single family rehab requires 100% LMI benefit. So essentially that family that's occupying the house needs to meet the LMI criteria. And then for new housing construction, we have more information regarding that in our program and application guide. And then the last category for the national objectives is limited clientele. Under limited clientele, the activity must benefit a specific group where at least 51% of the individuals are low to moderate income. This is determined by qualifying under one of a couple different tests that they have. The first one is called the HUD presumed group, and you can see on your screen that's the categories included in that group are outlined in the blue box. It includes, I won't read them all, but it includes abused children, elderly persons, etc. Or they require documentation of family size and income to show at least 51% are LMI, or have income eligibility requirements limiting it to LMI, or be of such a nature and location that it's presumed to benefit this limited clientele. So again, we have much more information if it looks like this is the direction that your project might qualify under for the national objective. You can go to chapter 2 of the implementation guide, and we have much more information about that. And of course, we would be happy to answer any specific questions regarding your project when you're thinking through this piece and how you're going to qualify for these categories. All right. Moving along, the next section is going to talk a little bit about eligible activities. So if your project meets a national objective, as we just talked about, the next step is to determine if the activities that you're going to be undertaking as part of the project are eligible under CDBG regulations. So again, that pre-application meeting that we keep talking about is critical to making sure that your project aligns with these federal regulations and making sure that the activities that are going to be occurring as part of your project are eligible activities. So the CDBG Planning Grant Program funds planning and related activities to determine whether or not a proposed project will be viable. So we list here some different eligible activities that are included under planning grants. The applicants should design and implement studies which can be completed within a 12-month period. So it's meant to be a relatively short-term planning phase. The intent with these grants is for applicants to come in and seek these grants for a project they intend to ultimately come back to CDBG and apply for implementation dollars for that grant. So that is a good way, if you have an idea of a project, a good way to kind of to test and see if it might be appropriate is to think about what the project that you're hoping to accomplish as a result of this planning grant, and think about if that would meet CDBG objectives and requirements. And if so, there's a good chance that it would be a good candidate for a CDBG planning grant. And again, you can come in at any time of the year with an application for those funds. The next type of eligible activities is housing. Housing activities include those meeting the national objective of providing or improving permanent residential structures to be occupied by low and moderate income households upon completion. Rental and owner-occupied housing is eligible. Low and moderate income homeowners and landlords that rent to LMI residents are eligible for financial assistance. And eligibility is very nuanced, but activities include, but are not necessarily limited to acquisition and rehabilitation of housing, elderly or ADA access, and new construction in a designated area, and only through a federally recognized CBDO. A CBDO is a community-based development organization, and this is again a federal certification. And if you are an organization that is interested in seeking the certification, we encourage you to reach out to our office, and we will help go through what is required to become an eligible CDBO. Typically, new housing projects will limit the CDBG activity to like soft costs, which include maybe the infrastructure and support of that new housing. So that's typically new construction is not funded through CDBG, but there is this exception for CDBDOs. Sorry, CBDOs, getting my acronyms confused. All right, and so the next eligible activity is public facilities. They fall essentially into three different subcategories: water and sewer, which can be a number of different things that fall under that, such as extending or replacing water or sewer lines, constructing water or sewer treatment facilities, constructing water storage tanks or reservoirs, and maybe construction or replacement of wells. So there are a number of different types of water and sewer activities that may be eligible under public facilities. Also, public property is a category under public facilities. This includes funding used for elderly or handicapped access to public buildings, to acquire or construct streets, sidewalks, recreation areas, medical facilities. And then there's also public services as well. And this is not, it's actually for the infrastructure. So the buildings, for example, where public services take place, not the services themselves. But examples of this would include, the acquisition, construction, or rehabilitation of homeless shelters, community centers, and neighborhood facilities where these types of public services are provided. This category also includes childcare and adult care facilities. So as you can see, there are a number of different types of activities under public service facilities that might be eligible. And some of the ones under, some of the projects under the public facilities category, there is match requirements for the public property activities. And we would certainly talk with you about that again at that pre-application meeting and make sure it's clear early on, if match is required in the amount. The next type of eligible activity is economic development. The goal is to expand economic opportunities, the goal is to expand economic opportunities for low and moderate income individuals. So there are a number of eligible activities that you can see listed out here, which includes the purchase of equipment, working capital, acquisition and construction of commercial buildings, etc. So we have much more information on this in Chapter 2 of our guide. It's important to remember that all projects must result in job creation and/or job retention, and those beneficiaries or those people that have those jobs must be low and moderate income individuals. So that's a key component in the economic development type of activities. And then lastly, just to touch upon the ineligible activities, these are activities that are specified in the regulations as being ineligible for CDBG funding. They include the general expense of conducting government, political activities, new housing construction, unless you're a CDBO, construction of government buildings, expenses of operating and maintaining public facilities, and then purchases of personal property. So again, I think the most common type of project that we have inquiries about that falls under being ineligible activities is oftentimes for town-owned buildings, that are people are often seeking sources for funding for renovation or expansion of those facilities, and typically those are not eligible. Sometimes with the exception of some ADA accessibility, but for regular town-owned buildings, that typically falls under ineligible activities. So I'm just going to pause here. We're about to just go through some of the thresholds, which again are an important piece of the application process. But if anybody has any questions and wants to drop those in the Q&A box, please feel free to do that. I'm going to go through this next section on thresholds, and I encourage you, if there's any questions about this, either during the presentation or after, please reach out to this, because this is an area where we often have the most questions come into us, and it can be confusing to somebody, especially if you're new to CDBG. So again, there are specific threshold requirements that must be met at the municipal level in order to apply for CDBG. They include citizen participation and engagement, and this has to all occur in advance of the application being submitted to CDFA. These requirements ensure that the local community is informed about the CDBG program and that the specific request for federal funds to support a project within the community occurs. So municipal thresholds include public notice, which again is includes a public hearing that needs to occur regarding the project, and there are timelines and timeframes that need to happen for public noticing and for that public hearing that you need to make sure you pay attention to. Again, the purpose of all this is to make sure that the public is informed about the CDBG program and the project that you are hoping to undertake. There also must be a housing and community development plan that's adopted by the governing body in accordance with public notice and public hearing requirements. That plan identifies current housing and community development needs, or those that are anticipated within the next 3 years. The plan also needs to identify short and long-term objectives consistent with national and state objectives. And then lastly, there's also something called the Residential Anti-Displacement and Relocation Assistance Plan, which is a mouthful, but essentially it is required to be adopted before obligating and expending CDBG funds, and public notice and hearing requirements apply to that as well. So those are all really critical initial thresholds that need to be met at the municipal level with all of the required public noticing and public hearing requirements surrounding that. And then additional documentation is also required as part of the application that enables CDFA to further evaluate an applicant for readiness and to make sure that we understand the capacity of the grantee and the subrecipient, because we want to make sure that the project is going to be successfully carried out and that there is a need for funds. So these documents that you need to submit along with your application demonstrate that the project's going to conform to federal, state, and program rules and regulations. This documentation needs to ensure that to show that the project meets readiness criteria such as local planning and zoning board approvals and other permits that might be necessary for the construction of the project. The documentation also is used to help us determine the applicant's capacity and performance to carry out the project, like I said. So for prior grantees, this includes an evaluation of the municipality's current capacity to take on another project if there's already some outstanding projects going on in the community. And then also there is a number of financial documentation, a number of financial documents that are required to submit with your application for both the grantee and the subrecipient, so that CDFA can use those to determine that the project can or will be carried out by the applicant and nonprofit subgrantee, and that and most importantly, that the funds are needed and that there aren't other funding sources available. It's really important for us to be able to ensure that the CDBG funds are going to projects that really need the funds in order to move forward and be successful. So the last thing is a compliance plan needs to be included with your application that demonstrates that the applicant has considered how to undertake a number of federal compliance measures, and we talk a little bit more about this in the next slide.
Molly, I'm just going to pause as there's a question in the chat to cover. Can we cover the wording for the public, I think it's public facility notice, to cover CDBG and or CDBG-CV fund requests for this round? And unless this is a little bit more complicated than what I'm understanding in terms of the question, I think that that's language that we can provide a template for to communities following the workshop.
Yeah, that's exactly. We could certainly provide a template of that language, but I will just say, and it's a good point, that if if your project is related to the prevention or response to the COVID-19 pandemic. When you are doing your public noticing and public hearings, you will likely want to include that you are seeking funding, both CDBG and CDBG-CV, because it is two separate sources or allocations of funding, essentially. So you will, if it is a COVID-19 related project, likely want to make sure you do notice both of those in those notices.
Great, thank you. And if we didn't answer that question fully, please just drop us another note in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll look back to address it further. But we can definitely get those templates out to people and post them on their resource hub if that's helpful.
Yeah. Yep. And then, so I think the last slide in this section is just on the compliance plan, and we just have a little more detail here about the some of the key points that are in the compliance plan. How the grantee plans to address these key compliance topics should be included in this compliance plan that's submitted with the application. If the applicant is awarded CDBG funds, then these compliance plans are going to be reviewed and finalized in a meeting with all the project stakeholders, because again, these are really critical requirements and that the projects need to follow. So we will be working with you should you be awarded funding to make sure that all of these requirements are met. Additional details on each of these topics can be found in our CDBG implementation guide. And again, that is located on our resource hub under the community development block grant section, and then under the implementation section of the website there. So that is all I have for that section, but I do want to pause before throwing it over to my colleague Scott to see if there were any other questions that might have come up. I know that's a lot of information that we covered there, and it's a lot of the the federal requirements and important pieces. So if there are any questions that come up after the fact, once you're reviewing this, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I'd be happy to answer those questions or get into more detail about any of those sections that we may have just briefly talked about. And I do want to note again that our recently updated application and program guide is a really great resource, and we strongly encourage you all to take a look at that, and you'll find a lot of the information and the details regarding these things that we just talked about, both in that guide and then also in the implementation guide as well. The pieces about the national objectives are in the implementation guide. So please refer to those documents as a helpful supplement to the information that we're sharing with you all today. So if there aren't any further questions, I think I'm going to kick it over to Scott now to talk about energy.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Molly. And everyone, I know that was a ton of information, so everyone take 5 seconds to take 3 deep breaths. Wake yourself up. Okay, so I am Scott Maslansky. I direct our clean energy programs. We'll be discussing CDFA's energy policy as it relates to your applications, your potential applications. Through our investments in community and economic development organizations and projects, CDFA, we're also aiming to reduce operating and maintenance costs, improve comfort and health, and extend the life of your facilities. So we provide several resources that help to support doing this. If you're going to be doing energy efficiency type work or adding renewable energy, we have a combination of funds for energy related assessments. We have low interest financing available for implementation projects, and we also have technical assistance to help you build a better project. And through this process of talking about the policy, I'm happy to work with you, all the way through. I am expecting to talk to, a representative from every project about this to help, move this piece along. So one program I wanted to mention, up front is eligible municipalities and nonprofit organizations can apply for grants covering 75% of the cost of an energy-related study, whether an energy audit, an energy design charrette, a solar feasibility study, or a structural analysis. Grantees can then apply to USDA's Community Facilities Direct Loan and Grant Program, as well as other funding sources from CDFA and elsewhere for implementation grants. So this is a great resource that will apply to some municipalities to help cover the costs of some of the requirements that you might see through your CDBG application regarding energy. And also, of course, for CDBG, there's also the planning grants where an energy audit could be included in that, especially if you're already doing a planning grant. So there's a few resources for you. Okay, the next slide. Low interest financing from CDFA enables businesses, nonprofits, and municipalities to enhance a capital improvement project, with a clean energy upgrade, or you could focus exclusively on a clean energy project. The loans are intended to provide neutral or positive cash flow, followed by substantial savings. So, in addition to offering the low rates and flexible terms, it's important to note that many of the projects that you have might have a component where you're going to actually see energy savings, or you're producing electricity through solar, and there's going to be a return on that investment. And in those cases, they don't necessarily all need to be covered by grant funds. You could have some grant funds that reduce the upfront cost of those projects to some extent, and then you can take out low interest financing to cover the rest, and you'll come out ahead throughout, being cash flow positive and substantially more afterwards. So it helps you build a larger project that meets more of your goals. Next slide. CDFA developed our first energy policy in 2020 to make sure that applicants assess the opportunities for reducing future operating costs, improving the occupant comfort and health, and improving the durability of facilities. The following requirements in the policy apply to all CDBG, tax credit, and clean energy fund applications, and to any project proposing a physical alteration to an existing energy system. So that would be the building envelope, the outside of the building that holds the heat in, your mechanical systems, your lighting systems, etc. Or if you're doing new construction, they would apply as well. And new construction would include, in addition to a building, or a gut rehab of a building, maybe where you're changing the use or substantially changing the layout. Alternative types and levels of assessments that are recommended by an energy professional will be considered. New construction projects that are planning to reach some high level of certification, LEED certification, passive house, net zero standards, these can waive our energy policy requirement as long as we have a documented intent for that level of efficiency from your design team. In that case, we would still highly recommend an energy charrette, which I'll talk about, because those we have found still are very effective. In some cases, if your project does not relate to changing any kind of energy system, or if it's too early for this type of assessment, we do have a waiver process, which I'll discuss in a few slides. Next slide, please. So the policy itself is really two slides, and it's available in the application and program guide, as well as on our resource website for you to look through. The first table shows the requirements for an alteration or a retrofit project. The two key requirements are that the applicant would complete what's called a level 2 energy audit, and that you consult with your appropriate utility for potential implementation incentives. We want to make sure that you're not leaving potential funding on the table that could help improve your project design and future savings. We also have a set of recommendations in the area that's in the shaded area there. The first one, that projects try to incorporate some of the energy assessment recommendations into their final design, or into their equipment purchases. The second one is that projects would commission any new energy system. And commissioning is where a third party would come in and verify that a system was installed correctly, and would also help to train building staff on how best to use or maintain the equipment. Just because you have energy efficient equipment doesn't mean it's going to be energy efficient unless you know how to use it well and it's been installed properly. And the third recommendation is that we encourage high performance construction, such as with the certifications listed in the policy. Okay, next slide. So this slide is virtually the same, except that it's for new construction or gut rehab. The minor differences are that instead of an energy audit, we're requiring an energy design charrette, which is where your design team would meet with an energy consultant and the utility to discuss how the development of the design for the project can be improved and reduce future operating costs. And again, we have found these to be very helpful and effective, even in many cases where architects say, no, we know what we're doing, we don't need any help, we build green buildings. We have still found in those cases that they come back and say that was really helpful. In new construction, we also require commissioning of any new energy systems. And this was a recommendation in the previous slide, but we really want to make sure, especially on a new building, that those systems have another look to make sure they're implemented properly. Next slide. I'm sorry, there is a third slide to the policy, which is about water, wastewater projects, which are, need to also adhere to the policy. And this will be more of a discussion about whether the policy, would apply and how it would best apply in various cases. So that's a conversation we can have. Next slide. So we bring in NH Saves in here. We try to keep the loop going between all of us with these projects. The earlier your utility is aware of your project, the better positioned they are to offer you incentives, which in some cases might impact your design or equipment choices. So you don't want to do this towards the end. You want to do this very early on so they can discuss what incentives might be available, not only for the project itself, but for the assessment that you might be required to do here. Sometimes they can help with that. We will provide you with a list of the utility contacts here, as well as a list of energy consultants that might be able to help out. And in all cases, please let them know you're applying for CDFA funds so we can all be on the same page. Next slide. So this one's a little bit busy, but I did want to run through a few examples of how we use the policy to review the projects and to consider waivers. So I won't go through all of them, but the first one there, Sunrise Towers in Laconia, the project involved considerable energy improvements, and they completed a level 2 audit for the project prior to their application. So they passed the threshold. Avesta Housing, the second one in Conway, we're doing new construction fairly early in the design. And so they were planning to do a passive house, which is a very, very high level of construction on the, from the energy perspective. And so we scheduled an energy design charrette with them. They weren't necessarily required to do this because their architect could say they were going to the passive house standard, but they decided to do it anyway. And really we're glad that they did. Again, this passes the threshold. Skip down to the community kitchen in Keene. In that case, it wasn't a straight, assessment. So they wanted to talk about, us meeting with their engineer to do some energy modeling instead, but this wouldn't happen for a little while because of where they were in their design stage. So they submitted a waiver for the timing and the scope of the assessment, and we discussed, how they could fulfill, our requirements through this process, and we were able to do that with this waiver and then future modeling that they did. If you go down to the water line replacement in Newmarket, in this case, this was just replacing water lines, so there wasn't necessarily changing of pumps and motors and specific energy items, though the reduction in water leakage would have had an energy impact. But in this case, there wasn't really an assessment to do, so this was a waiver that the requirement was not applicable. And then lastly, the same thing for ADA renovations in Newport, where there was a waiver because the requirement was not applicable. The ADA renovations weren't touching an energy system like the building envelope. Okay, next slide. So the next steps for you regarding the energy policy, make sure to review the policy soon and consider whether your project needs some type of energy assessment. Remember that there are grants available either through our community facilities energy assessment grant for some communities, potential for CDBG planning grants, or in some cases, NH Saves will also support an energy design charrette or an audit. Make sure you contact your utility representative early, mention that you're applying to CDFA, and discuss, even if your design is still very, very, very early, you could discuss a plan for when it's best to go and do one of these assessments. And then submit a waiver if needed. If your project, if the policy is not applicable, if you want to request an exception to the timing of when you fulfill this requirement or the type of energy assessment that the policy states. Those would also require waivers. The waiver should be submitted before your application is submitted. We'll review it, give it back to you, and you upload it, assign one with the application. And please, early on, call me, we'll talk through it, make this less of an extra step for you if we just kind of to nail down a plan early on. And that's it. Please reach out to me with questions and to discuss the process. Thanks. I think I'll hand it back to Molly. Unless there are questions.
Thank you so much, Scott. This next section is actually mine. This is Katie again. And before we jump into evaluation and scoring, we'd love to understand the projects that you are thinking about for this upcoming round. And really, this is the most exciting thing for us, is really thinking about how do we support those projects that are being developed in communities. And that will give us a good sense of some things to focus on in this evaluation and scoring project. So I'll just ask everybody, if you could put in the chat the project that you're considering applying for, or projects. And if you don't have a project at this time, you're more listening for general information, be sure that that you have this information so you can think about future projects. That's fine as well. Maybe put in the chat some of the future projects you're kind of seeking out in communities that you serve. Great, so already we have a couple. So one is a mobile home cooperative that wants to improve their water and sewer. The acquisition of a mental health center, I imagine, so that mental health services can be provided in the community. And new construction for homeless services. Great. Housing. New housing. Shelter and permanent housing for homeless youth and young adults. Great. Interesting. A project, renovations to a building, and particularly to the residential units, to be able to provide community mental health services. Wonderful. Daycare. Addition to an independent living buildings to expand services and also provide an office for a family outreach worker. A new fire station that serves ambulance services supporting 5 communities. Fire stations are something we will want to talk to you about. That's hard to support with CDBG, usually not eligible, but love to hear more about the project and see if there's other funding that we have. So water and sewer, community-based services, housing, childcare, these are all high priority activities, and we'll talk about that evaluation and scoring. But it's really exciting to hear about all of the projects that you are advancing in your communities and how we can support them. And so I'll, at this point, go through our evaluation and scoring. And again, at any time, if you'd like us to pause, we will pause and answer questions. I want to also note that this evaluation and scoring section is new. So we took lots of great feedback over the last couple of years and really incorporated that into an update to this evaluation and scoring that was outlined in our action plan this year. So this is new, and again, it is outlined in our application and program guide. And so we'd encourage you to follow along in that application and program guide, and we'll provide an overview at today's workshop. So I'll jump right into that now. So as you went through the beginning part of the presentation, Molly really outlined those what we call threshold criteria. And that's the first process that we undertake, is to evaluate the materials that were provided with the application to meet those threshold criteria. And what she talked about is those various threshold criteria as it relates to the public hearing requirements, as well as the requirements of the municipality and the subgrantee to show that they can carry out the project successfully. So at this point in the process, our first step is to use those threshold evaluation criteria and to evaluate those and say whether the application passes the thresholds or whether it does not. And if for some reason, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, if for some reason that application doesn't pass those thresholds, we do our best to allow that to be remedied. If it's something that wasn't able to be remedied, then you'd be able to apply again in the upcoming round. But typically, those threshold criteria are met by our applicants, and we move to the next step. So, sorry for the confusion, but yeah, next. Thank you, Melissa. The next step is to look at the various needs of the community. And to do so, we look at these criteria here, and these are actually all data-based. You can see that they are in 3 different areas. The first is basic human needs. So this is the people in the municipality that's applying for the funding. What are the number of people in that municipality that are, for instance, receiving the food stamp? In addition, as you look into that access to opportunity, there's various information regarding data about people and their ability to access various opportunities in your community. And then the last criteria is community sustainability and vibrancy. And so in the Community Development Block Grant Program, these criteria, these indicators are actually given a score as they are compared to other municipalities in the state. And that score is called the Community Development Index. Next slide, please. So this information, the CDFA Core Data Index is available on our website. And we're actually building out the visualization of this data so that in the future, you'll actually be able to look at maps that show these data points in comparison to other communities. And you can really see on those maps where there's a significant need, for instance, for better access to affordable and healthy food, or where there's a significant need, as we know there is across the state, for affordable housing, but where that's most acute. And we use this index, which is a combination of those 11 data points, to create an index score for each community. And that score for CDBG is up to 70 points, and it's called the Core Data Index. This replaced what we called in the past the set factors. It does have a lot of the same data that was evaluated in those set factors, because it evaluated things like the number of people in the community that were low or moderate income, the number of people in the community in comparison to other communities that were in which households were primarily a single female heading that household. And so this provides those communities that have more of that vulnerability have a higher score. The score is up to 70 points. And again, it's based on data. And the nice thing about this Core Data Index, the thing that we're most excited about, one, is that we're hopeful that you'll be able to use this data as one tool in many to identify needs in your community and put forward projects. And secondly, and the other thing that we're excited about this index is that it's updated. So in the past, this was only based on census data, the set factors, and so they were updated with the census data and then with the census updates. But the data that we're using now is updated more frequently some of it as frequently as monthly, but we actually pull a new set of data every year in August and publish it in the fall to be used starting in January. And that means that our data is never more than a year old as it's accumulated to create that core data index number. So for any community, there is a number, again, up to 70 points. It's not something that you can change. It really is based on data, and it gives us just that data snapshot about what's happening in the community. So as you can see, this is the overview of the housing scoring. What you'll notice, I think, most significantly, or at first glance, is that the scoring was adapted so that it's now at a 200 points. In the past, it was 420 points for housing. It was different total scores for other program areas. We felt that we could simplify the scoring by making the scoring based on the same total score. So the total score now is 200 points, both for housing and public facilities. For planning grant evaluations, it's you can receive a total of 25 points. So we hope this improves transparency and understanding of our scoring system so that you can really have a sense of whether the project you're proposing aligns well with this scoring system. Again, this is updated or tweaked on an annual basis to reflect the needs across the state. So I'll go through each one of these categories now. I already went through the community needs, so that's that first line there, the community progress indicators out of those 70 points. The next criteria is what we call the need and impact. So this is for all projects in the housing round. They're compared against each other and receive the one with the most significant need and impact receives 40 points, and other projects in the round would receive 30, 20, or 5 points.
Katie, if we could just pause, we do have a question about scoring criteria, if you don't mind. So the question is, sorry, go ahead.
So we'll get to this question in just a few minutes, because that is for new construction activities. We are evaluating opportunities in the community, and there's data that we use for that evaluation. It will be coming up in just a few minutes. Is that, if you could just wait a few, then we'll get to that section. So the next criteria is whether there's significant long-term benefit. So for projects that can show that they have a long-term benefit of at least 20 years, they'll receive 10 points. For projects that have a long-term benefit of 10 years, it will be 5 points. And for projects that have the minimum, which is 5 years of long-term benefit, they'll receive 0 points in this category. The next is housing needs. So in this, we will be looking at, this is if your project is new construction. So there are, in this area of the scoring, there's 20 points, up to 20 points if you're new construction. And then the next category I'll go with is rehab, because the same data does not apply. So in this area, we're looking at the median rent. So as you can see, we're comparing the median rent of the community in which the project is proposed and comparing that to the state. And then here's where we are evaluating that high opportunity community. So we're looking at information that's identified in the Atlas Community Opportunity data, and you can see where you could find that data. And if the community has a higher household income at age 35 in comparison to other applicants in the round, it will receive 10 points. If it has a similar household income at age 35 as compared to other applications in the round, it would receive 5 points. And if the community has a lower household income at age 35 as compared to other applications, it will receive 0 points. So this again is to encourage the construction of affordable housing in communities that are considered high opportunity communities. And I'll just pause there to be sure that I've answered the question. So if there's any further questions on that, please add them into the question and answer now, and we'll be sure to get those answered. All right, well, we'll move on at this point, but if questions arise, we can obviously go back and be sure to get those answered. So again, that was 20 points, up to 20 points in the new construction category. If your project is a rehab, so you are your community, town of Franklin, well, that's a city. Let me choose that's also my brother's name, which I think is why I chose it. So I'll choose town of Ben. So if you're town of Ben and you're planning to work with a subrecipient who, let's say, is going to acquire some housing units, existing housing units, and you're going to rehab those housing units to make them safer and healthier, and to also ensure that they're affordable, you've committed to the 20-year benefit. Then we're going to evaluate that's considered a rehabilitation project, and you'll be the 20 points, up to 20 points that you can receive for your rehabilitation project will be scored by looking at the gross income and housing costs as compared to the census data. And it's up to 20 points on whether there's a cost burden in the community that the rehabilitation project is proposed in. And then this third category, again, so there's 3 different categories that depending on the type of project, you can receive points in the first, the new construction category, in the second that I just went through, which is rehabilitation, or in this category, which is considered homeowner new construction. So this is if you were constructing single family housing units for sale to low and moderate income individuals. So this is similar to the new construction. So this is where we'll be looking at whether people in the defined area who are going to be served are living in poverty or not, in compared to the American survey, the American Community Survey data. And then again, in the second part of this, combined to make 20 points, we're looking at the opportunity as defined by the Atlas Community Opportunity data. And then for all projects, we will be looking at the cost of housing and looking at whether households pay more or less in terms of the cost of housing, to determine how significant the cost burden is of housing in that community. Up to 20 points. Next, we're going to really be thinking about implementation. So this can also be called readiness. And this is where we're looking to ensure that projects are prioritized if they're ready for implementation in accordance to the following criteria. And if they're ready for implementation by having completed the architectural and engineering designs up to 25%, they'll receive 20 points. And if they have not, or if they've done part of this work, so they've done a cost estimate, but they haven't gotten their architectural and engineering drawings yet to 25%, so they've done one of those criteria but not both, they'd receive that 10 points. And if they've done neither of these criteria, because we know that it can be difficult to advance these, although if it is something that you're looking to advance and you need assistance in doing so, you can apply for the planning grant or our pre-development funding. But if you haven't done either of those, then you'll receive 0 points in this category. So at this, in this funding category, we will be looking at leveraged funds. So this is the calculation of non-CDBG funds to CDBG funds for a total of 5 points. And you can see the breakdown of that comparison of non-CDBG to CDBG funds. We will provide points up to 5 points if you're meeting any of these energy use goals. So as you heard outlined by Scott, our energy policy requires that you evaluate opportunities for energy efficiency and renewable and other opportunities to advance those goals. But our policy does not require the implementation. But if you are able to implement those things, which would be our priority because it leads to sustainability and healthy homes, then you will receive up to 5 points depending on what you're implementing. And then there's up to 10 what we consider bonus points. So this is 10 points, and there's further defining of the criteria in the application and program guide. But if you're able to show significant resident engagement, connection to regional and municipal plans, and that your project supports centers and neighborhoods, you'll receive up to 10 bonus points for meeting any of those criteria. And all that together does equal that 200 points that can be reached. Although no project will receive the full 200 because we do know that core data index up to 70, that there's no communities that have that full 70. So there'll be a range of scores, and depending on all of these criteria, it would be up to nearly 200 points. And I'll just pause there. That's the end of our housing scoring. Are there any questions about the housing scoring?
Not seeing any currently in the chat or the Q&A.
Okay, well, we'll move on at this point to the public facilities scoring. So you'll see a number of the same areas and also some different areas, just because we know there are different needs in our public facility area. And so I'll go through these criteria now, and you'll see again that reaches that maximum score of 200 points. So the first category, we discussed it at length, so I won't anymore, is again that community index score of up to 70 points. The second is similar to the housing, so that's a project showing the greatest need and impact will receive 40 points. The next substantial need 30, moderate 10, minimum 5, and no need and impact will receive 0 points. Again, consistent with the housing scoring, long-term benefit. So projects that have that commit to a 20-year benefit will receive 10 points. Those that are committing to a 10-year benefit will receive 5 points, and a score of 0 points for projects that are committed to that minimum 5-year benefit. As we look at the priority, projects that have a component that are childcare related, mental health related, or have a broadband component will receive priority scoring points of 20. Projects that do not have those, but instead serve special populations, and you can see the special populations listed here, will receive 10 points, and all other projects will receive 0 in this scoring category. In terms of community support, we're looking at 3 different categories. The first is whether the project meets 2 of those priority areas listed in the above slide. The second is for projects, the location of a project. So if the project revitalizes a community by being located in any of these designated zones, it will receive 5 points. And if the project can show community buy-in, then it will receive up to 5 points for the degree of community buy-in. Altogether, these areas encompass and show significant community support for the public facility project. We'll be looking at the readiness for implementation. And so in terms of readiness for implementation, it's the same criteria. If 2 of those criteria are met, it will be 20 points. If the application does not show those two, shows one of those two criteria, but not both, it will be 10 points. And if it does not, if the project's not able to show either of those criteria, it will receive 0 points for readiness. Again, we'll look at the leverage funds, the non-CDBG to CDBG leverage, up to 5 points according to this calculation here.
Katie, I just want to pause for a question that just came in. Whether a homeless shelter with wraparound support services, including mental health services, count as including a mental health component. In addition, is addiction treatment considered mental health services?
Yes, so as long as they're, as those services can be shown to be available at the project and supportive of the population being served by the project, and that would be that connection to mental health services, and addiction treatment services are considered mental health services in this area. So those have both received the 20 high priority points. Energy use. So again, we want to encourage the implementation of strong energy goals. So up to 5 points to meeting these criteria. And the 10 bonus points for projects that show a strong connection to regional or municipal plans, or that strengthen centers and neighborhoods. So that's the full 200 points for the public facilities. And I'll just pause for a second and be sure there's no questions on our public facility scoring. Great, so next we'll go into our planning grant scoring. So again, planning grants are accepted on a rolling basis, and it's up to, they are up to 25 points, and here are the criteria. And those criteria include the community progress indicators, the beneficiaries served, a strong connection to a regional or municipal plan, long-term benefits, committed funds, whether you've received CDBG grants in the past, really trying to ensure that grants are provided to the most municipalities as possible, whether the project that you're proposing is innovative, whether it will likely lead to implementation of a project, whether it addresses a high priority need, and whether there's a need for the study and implementation of the project. And altogether, those are the up to 25 points that can be received for a planning grant. There's no minimum score for planning grants, but we do anticipate that the higher the score, the more likely you'll be recommended for funding. So emergency projects, again, those can also be received on a rolling basis, and those are projects that have a stated emergency that occurred within the last 18 months, in addition to meeting the application threshold criteria that were outlined in the application program category. If it's a housing related emergency, you'd meet those criteria. If it's a public facility related emergency, you'd be meeting those criteria. We do have a checklist that we encourage you to use to show that the emergency occurred in the last 18 months and therefore meets the definition of emergency. And if it does, then we would be scoring that application on the scoring criteria, either in housing or public facilities, whichever is appropriate. And there is, again, no minimum score, but the higher the score of the project, the more likely it would be recommended for funding. And then economic development, we've made no changes at this time to the economic development scoring. So the scoring is similar to years past, and it's a score based on the community progress indicators, that core data index up to 70 points. We then look at other economic factors, which are data based. We then look at the impact of the proposed project both the effect on employment, who's being served, how many low and moderate income people will be provided opportunities for employment based on the project, the employee benefits and the other public benefits, and then the benefit of the project to the business. And those scoring criteria are used to evaluate economic development projects, which do have a minimum score required. So if you're interested in an economic development project, again, the scoring hasn't changed, but we would encourage you to schedule a pre-application meeting with our Director of Economic Development, Kevin Peterson. So just to conclude, the majority of this workshop today focused on housing, public facilities, and then also housing and public facilities that could be supported with the CDBG-CV funds. For all of those applications, any housing project you're thinking of or a public facility project, we need to receive those applications by no later than Monday, July 26th by 4 o'clock, and that is a hard application deadline. We would encourage anybody, as Molly has said earlier in the presentation, who's thinking of a project to talk with us. We'd also encourage you to talk to us if you think your project has a coronavirus aspect, that it prepares, prevents, or is related to the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, that you speak to us about that, because we would encourage any project who's applying in this round to be considered for funding, both for CDBG funds as well as CDBG-CV. Those additional funds allow us just to have more funds available to grant in this funding round. And we will provide, as was requested, a template for that public hearing to be sure that you're notifying the public of your intent to apply for either CDBG or the CDBG-CV funds. After we receive those applications at the end of July, Molly and her team will get going on the application review and scoring, to include the threshold review that we spoke about, the evaluation and pre-score. We'll then do a site visit. At the site visit, we'll talk to you about anything that we're wondering about or clarification we need to finalize that score. We'll then finalize the score. And with that final score, we will create a recommendation to the Community Development Advisory Committee. And that advisory committee meets in November. We will invite you to that advisory committee meeting so that you're able to answer any questions about the project that we may not be able to cover. And after the advisory committee, a few days later, recommendations will go to our board of directors, and then we'll start the contracting process and look to support your implementation of these projects as soon as possible. Again, you apply online with our grants management system. The grants management system just recently received a very significant upgrade to the interface. We hope and expect it to be easier to use. But if you have any questions, please call us, because we're happy to walk through how to do so and ensure that you're able to successfully submit an application on that grants management system. If you're an existing user, you'll have a username and a password, and that's how you'll log into the system to start your application. But if you're a new user, you'll register with GMS as your first step. We'll stay on now to answer any remaining questions. And if you don't have any questions, we look forward to and hope to be able to meet with you about your application in the next month as you prepare a final application for the funding round. Thank you very much for your time this morning, and we'll be happy to answer any remaining questions now. With no questions posed, we will provide you these slides following this workshop, and we hope that you'll review the application and program guide. And I'll just pause to see if any of my team members want to add anything else before we conclude today's workshop.
I don't have anything else to add. I just wanted to thank everybody again for their time today and encourage you to reach out to me directly if you have any questions about your specific project. I'm happy to discuss those with you and help in any way that I can.